Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 113 of 2-Minute Talk Tips, the podcast that opens with a practical public speaking tip in the first 2 minutes before getting into a deeper discussion about public speaking. Today's tip comes to us from special guest Lyle Tard.
You got to have some tempo. You have to know two things about tempo. You have a tempo, and your talk is going to have a tempo. You have to find the tempo and match it with your own. And once you give that talk and yourself the right tempo, your talk is going to go well. That's going to be your sweet spot. That's going to be the place where you're going to be most comfortable. That's where you're going to be your most self when you're in the right tempo. Find the right tempo for your talk because it has one. It has a rate of speed. It has a feel. Once you feel that and then you know your own tempo, all the nervous energy for a talk goes away. All the wondering and whether or not you're going to deliver a good talk goes away because you're in your element. You're in your zone. It's all about tempo.
Stick around, and after the break, we'll hear more from Lyle Tard. Just a quick note here to say that May is Stroke Awareness Month. Now, regardless of when you hear this episode, you can help make the world a better place without spending any money. Take a few minutes and learn the signs of a stroke. Be fast. B-E-F-A-S-T. That stands for balance, eyes, face, arms, speech, and time to call an ambulance. A sudden loss of balance, loss of all or partial vision, facial drooping, arm drooping, or speech or language issues could indicate a stroke, and it is time to call an ambulance immediately because time lost is brain lost. So use your power of public speaking to share the warning signs of stroke with your colleagues, customers, friends, and relatives. The disability you prevent may be your own. To learn more about stroke, check out my other podcast, The Strokecast, over at strokecast.com and in your favorite podcast app. And, of course, be fast. Welcome back. Back in college on the debate team, I found my performance in competition rose or fell to the level of my competitors. The value in competing against a really awesome team was that it would draw out the best in my performance. That was my experience in today's conversation with speaker, trainer, podcaster, servant leader, and Air Force Technical Sergeant Lyle Tard. His enthusiasm and energy is contagious. And while we are not competitors, I certainly felt as though my performance in this episode was greatly enhanced by being in conversation with Lyle. Lyle Tard is the founder and CEO of Impact Servant Leadership, started in 2018. He is currently entering his 19th year as a technical sergeant in the United States Air Force and serves his country while on active duty at the 305th Maintenance Group at Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst as the non-commissioned officer in charge of training management. He has guided the careers of more than 10,000 airmen from civilian to military life, leading them in cutting-edge training of their newly developed skills. As a communicator, Lyle has spoken worldwide inside and outside of the military community. He has motivated young adults at institutions such as Atlanta Leadership College, American University, and Harvard Business School. Lyle is also the primary moderator of the Service is Power podcast, spreading the message that the power to serve serves us all. So now, let's meet Lyle. So Lyle, thank you so much for joining us on 2-Minute Talk Tips this week.
It's so good to be here with you, Bill.
I mean, this is awesome. I was looking over your background, and you've got a really interesting background that aligns with mine and is very different from mine at the same time. For example, I never served in the military, but I have made my career in learning and development and getting people excited about stuff. So I think that's going to be for a very interesting discussion. But to begin with, I mean, what was your earliest experience with public speaking?
This is such an interesting question. I've never actually been asked this question before. So it was in elementary school. I was kind of a hype guy. What I was supposed to do is I was a part of a community club. And so when the people were kind of getting together and gathering, again, this is in grade school, I was supposed to be the person that would say something or sing something that everybody would kind of quiet down, pay attention, and they would have to repeat after me. So I don't remember the whole thing, but it was, so I was supposed to say, I said a boom, chicka boom, and everybody's supposed to repeat it. And then I said a booma, chicka, rocka, chicka boom. And so when I did it, I just yelled it out, Bill. I just yelled it out. I said a boom, chicka. And they were like, what is that weirdo? Who is? But I wasn't nervous. I wasn't nervous at all. I just said it again. And then I said, hey, you guys got to repeat after me. And so I realized at that point, I'm like, okay, I might have something here.
Right. That's awesome. I like to ask that question because all of those earlier experiences, they so influence what we want to do in life and how we go ahead and present ourselves in front of folks.
Yeah, you're exactly right. That moment when I walked away from doing that whole bit, I really start to see that the nerves that people have, especially when they're doing something that is maybe nerve-wracking or they have all eyes on them, that it affected me a different way. So even into sports, that whole butterfly feeling that people get, it makes people shaky. It makes me feel phenomenal. I love it. I can't wait for it.
Right. And, it's that whole energy, that physical energy that, we build up in anticipation of something. For some folks, that gets translated into nervousness and anxiety. And for others, it gets transformed into just this energy to go out and make it happen.
Yeah, definitely. And I am definitely one of those people, unless my palms start to get sweaty. When my palms start to get sweaty, it's a bad deal. Other than that, we're good to go.
So is there a particular type of event that makes your palms get sweaty?
Basketball, and playing my video games. If you can imagine, when I get to that stage, when I'm playing a video game and I know I'm playing the final boss or the big moment or the big event or the big deal, or when somebody that's been talking a lot of trash has come over and said, okay, now we get to play, all that anticipation comes up and my palms start to get sweaty. And then of course, when I was playing basketball, my palms would get sweaty, but of course, then I would be able to use like, the powder and stuff. And that was really cool. But when I'm speaking, no, there's no sweaty palms. It's just like, let's get it like right now. Let's go. I definitely do love that part.
Awesome. It's one of those things where I find, I don't get the sweaty palms, but I sometimes do get, if I'm getting nervous before giving a talk, usually it's because I'm not prepared. It's content I had to throw together at the last minute, or I just don't know it as well. And that's when it's more likely to get to me, when I'm just not ready. And, I think when you talk about hitting the big boss in the video game, yeah, that's part of it too. It's like, am I really ready for this? Do I have enough rockets or nukes for my Fat Boy in Fallout or whatever it is?
No, you're exactly right. And it's also whether or not I have the talent, if I can actually do it. In the moment in a basketball game, when you are playing against another team and you're in that crunch time moment, you've practiced, you've done all that you can, but whether or not you can actually execute, that's the big deal. Now, one of the things that I do while I'm in the military, in the Air Force, is that I help people with study skills. And what I tell those individuals when they go into testing rooms, they talk about test anxiety and being nervous when it comes to a test. What you were talking about, Bill, as far as being prepared, knowing that you have the information from your head to your heart ready to execute, that is what is going to dispel all the nervous energy, because you already know, you've pre-planned, you've put it in your head, you've pushed it down into your heart, and all now you need to do is just go do the test, go do the talk, because everything you've done before then makes all of the difference. And what you're saying is exactly right. You got to be prepared. You got to know that you're prepared. Hey, because when I play video games and I get killed or I lose, I'm like, oh, okay, that's the move that guy's going to do. And so the next time I go in there, I'm good. No sweaty palms,
Exactly. And what's really great about that too, is that whole need to be prepared, that's all something that's within your control.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely within your control. It is something that you have to look at your calendar. You have to look at yourself. You have to know what's up against you and then go tackle it, go destroy it, go kill it, because once we're prepared and once we understand that we have all of the control in our hands, it makes it so much easier. It should really put our mind at ease. But I've met some people where it kind of makes them a little bit weird when they feel like they have to be in control. As a matter of fact, you're talking about control. I wrote an article on LinkedIn and I was talking about being out of control. One of the reasons why I hate roller coasters, I absolutely can't stand roller coasters, Bill. Can't stand them. The biggest reason why is because I'm not in control. Now, if you get me in a Mercedes E-Class on the Autobahn in Europe and I can just go, it's because I'm in control. I mean, I'm going almost as fast. And so it's not the speed. It's not the twists and the bumps and the turns. It's the fact that I've got my hands on the steering wheel and my foot is on the gas and I can easily push the brake whenever I want. The fact that I'm in control allows me to manipulate the situation in my favor. And once I have that mental capacity to understand that and then execute it, it makes the world of difference. And we can do that when we're on the stage and when we're speaking as well, having that control of that situation, which, that's what this whole thing is all about.
Absolutely. And that also then means you also have a lot of trust in yourself. You have to be in control and you have to trust that you're in control.
Wow, that's so good. You know what? I'm just going to trust you for this podcast because, you're dropping flavor bombs in like really quick nuggets and then I'm going on these spills. But yes, you're exactly right. That trust factor is so important. When you can trust yourself, when you know within yourself what your ability is, and then you execute to that ability and then even push yourself to know that you can even grow higher and better and faster and more knowledgeable, have much more confidence. Trust is a big deal. Just listening to even you as a podcast host, I have trust in the fact that I'm in a safe space because of your ability to guide this thing. So, hey, Bill, I trust you. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. This is just going so well. And I credit you for that, man.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you very much. And that's one of those other things. Now, as an outsider, this is something I'm kind of curious about too, because it also sounds like that whole idea of being prepared and trusting yourself. That also seems like that's a core of some of the training that happens in the military. Is that accurate?
Oh, wow. Yes, definitely. So we're talking a little bit about the learning and development, the training and development. That's what I'm all about in the military right now. I've been a training and development manager for the last 13 years in the United States Air Force. And what we do is we put people through scenarios, put them through mock moments so that they're able to really see what a scenario or a real life situation would be like. And we take them through this rigorous process. The fantastic thing about what I do is I'm able to build those scenarios, build those opportunities, build those categories of how a person cycles through a certain thing. So one of the pieces of advice that I definitely would give any speaker is put yourself in a mental scenario of actually being able to do your talk, do your speech, do your presentation. You put yourself there mentally. Now, what we do in the military is we actually put them in front of the aircraft, in front of the equipment, in front of the scenario and situation, whether it be a wartime, peacetime situation. We put them in that place to see how they would react to a typical scenario or situation. And then we can pull it back. We can say, hey, these are the things that we did right, did wrong, and we can course correct. We can get better. Another tip that you probably heard here on this podcast is that, hey, get an audience, man. Get some people that you trust that will listen to your talk, that will listen to whatever your presentation is. And they can tell you, hey, this is what you did well. This is what you didn't do well. This is what you can work on. And this is what you can improve on.
And that's, a very important way of going ahead and doing that simulation, getting people exposed to it, helping them develop those patterns before they encounter it in the real world. But what do you think would surprise most civilians about the learning environment that your airmen, I believe that's the correct term, go through?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I think civilians would be really surprised about how serious we are. I mean, almost as if there's no room for error, even in the training environment, because the reality is lives are in the balance sometimes, depending on what you're doing. Honestly, it's not even really depending on what you're doing, because what we like to do, especially in the Air Force, is we like to relate the scenario that that person's in to how it really plays out in the real world. We are what's called an expeditionary force right now. That's what the way we think. And that's pretty much being globally reaching, being able to take our assets from wherever we currently are to wherever it needs to be all over the world. And so a person who is sitting in an office, typing on a computer, doing some paperwork, well, we want them to go through a real life scenario and show them how that is going to transpire on the other side. And I think people would come into our situation, civilians would come into our situation and see, wow, these guys in the Air Force aren't playing games. There's not a whole lot of warm fuzzies and rubbing people on the back and massaging people's temples. We're not making things comfortable for our airmen. We're going to put them to the test because we want to make sure that they can perform at the most critical points and times.
Well, I think it's really interesting about that when you talk about the person who's going to be in the office doing the paperwork and you want to connect that paperwork to what's going to happen on the ground, that there are, in fact, literally lives at stake in a way there isn't in most corporate training. But being able to connect with this is where you are, this is what you're doing, this is what happens, that seems a lot about what needs to happen in speaking too, is that you have to connect what you're talking about with the results for your audience.
Bill, wow, you're exactly right. If we're not speaking about what that audience is dealing with, if we haven't connected what we're talking about to those people, they're going to be lost. Your talk is going to be lost. Really, the entire credibility of who you are and what you do, especially as a speaker, is completely destroyed. When you go back to that scenario of that airman is being not just paid, but trusted, as you were talking about earlier. They're trusted to do this certain portion or part of their job so the rest of the jobs can be done. So when we come to an event as a speaker, that event planner, that person that hired us to come into that position to do that speech, or if it's within our own company or corporation, our boss, our higher ups are expecting us. They are literally depending on us to deliver a certain talk, a certain presentation or speech that will display something that makes the whole of the company, the whole of the conference, the whole of the idea alive to the people that we're speaking to. So we have to be prepared. We have to kind of put ourselves in a real world. That's what we call it in the Air Force, a real world scenario. And we got to put ourselves in those pressure positions so that we can rise to the occasion, especially in a speech. You're exactly right. It takes all those things to make sure that we're doing the right thing when we're getting ready to give a talk.
And unfortunately, some folks who are out there speaking don't quite deliver as well as they would like and as well as everyone else would like. I mean, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen other business professionals making when they take a stage?
You know what? I've been ready for this question. I'm so excited for this question. But the things that we've been talking about here, there are actually quite a few things that business professionals should be doing. And they make quite a few mistakes. First of all, they take the audience for granted. That's the first thing I'm going to say. Taking the audience for granted is not cool, because while we have great content, while we have something really cool to say, it doesn't make sense if what my cool thing to say is it's to a 5-year-old. It really doesn't make sense because the 5-year-old doesn't get anything that I'm talking about as far as the military. So if I'm going to sit here and have a military conversation with you, Bill, and you, as of course, you tell us in the beginning of the podcast that you've never served, and I start using weird lingo, if I start talking about Air Force terms that have no meaning or context to you, I've completely lost you. I'm not able to do what I want to do is with you as an audience member. So what I see a lot of business professionals do is they put their talk so high up on a pedestal that they forget about the audience. They don't care about the audience. It's all about them. It's all about their talk. It's all about what they're going to say. And hey, you audience member, you're just going to have to either get it or not. So that's number one. Number two, man, professionals waste the first few moments of their talk on themselves. Most times when we get up to speak, it's not just our own event where we're just going to get out there and just kind of do our thing. Somebody is running that event. Somebody is leading that event. And what they're mostly going to do is introduce the person that's about to speak. They give you your introduction. They say who you are. So why in the world would you get up and reintroduce yourself to the people? No, you've got everyone's attention at this juncture. Everybody is waiting with bated breath on what it is that you're going to say that is going to keep their attention, that's going to wow them, that is going to make the purpose of you being up there solidified. Don't waste that moment. Don't waste it on just talking about who you are and what your credentials are and where you're from and what you're going to talk about today. No, use that opportunity to compel them to the next moment, to the next statement, to the next big idea. Don't waste that on just talking about you. Make sure you utilize those first few moments to the best of your ability.
That's awesome. Yeah, that is a very powerful time. And to be able to establish that and to land with something and to really go ahead and have that kind of impact.
Without question, we talk a lot about first impressions. Now, I'm not a huge believer when it comes to first impressions, but as a speaker, you better believe that your first impression is a lasting impression, and you got to take advantage of it.
Absolutely. Your first moment and your last couple of minutes also very important. Yes, definitely.
I have jacked up my last couple of minutes a couple of times too. So those are important. You're exactly right, Bill.
Well, those last few minutes, that's one of the toughest parts of a speech I found, either because a lot of times, especially earlier on, you're running out of time because you haven't done the prep work in advance to make sure you either know what you can cut or you know just how long your talk is. And you sort of peter out instead of landing with an impact or landing with a theme. And that takes practice and that takes learning.
It definitely does, because when you're in control of your talk, which is kind of what we've been theming this whole thing around as we've been discussing this, Bill, when we are in control of that whole entire talk, we know exactly what it is that we need to emphasize. We know what we can kind of ad lib and add or subtract from, so that way we can serve the customer in the greatest possible way. And that customer is definitely that planning person, the person who's putting on the event, and the audience members as well. And that last part is typically for a lot of speakers where we are most excited, because if you're a nervous individual, you can't wait for that thing to end, right? But then of course, if you're a confident person, that's where you make your money. At the end of the talk, you're hoping that the event planner wants to invite you back. And if you leave them with something that's lasting, and you leave them with something that they remember you, and they remember what you did for the audience, what you did for them. But if you're not in control of the talk, and all of a sudden you have to cut something off at the end, that big crescendo that you had at the end of the talk, all of a sudden that credibility that you had in the beginning is now lost. Who knows if the event planner is going to call you back? You've gone over your time. You've almost kind of disrespected them. That's never cool. So you definitely want to be in control of that whole thing. That's a great point, Bill.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also one of the reasons why I generally recommend you don't do Q&A at the end. Maybe you do Q&A that ends 5 minutes before the end of your talk, so that you can take control back after the Q&A and be able to sum up what it is you want to say, be able to land those points, and make sure your audience leaves knowing the actions you want them to take.
You're exactly right. And I like to add another thing on it. Me as a servant leader, what I want to do is I want to ensure that the information I just gave these people are actionable, something that they could use. And so if I leave 5 to 10 minutes at the end of my talk for questions, I know a couple of things about my talk, whether or not I was able to actually engage them. And then you can also get some feedback on the things that you talked about. You get to know your audience in a little bit more intimate way once you're able to get some information back, some feedback, some understanding of how you delivered the information, whether or not it was viable for them, how you can intensify your ability to serve them because you're answering the questions that they have deep in their mind. We should probably embed that stuff in our talk. When we're giving a talk, you want the questions coming out of the minds of the people that we're serving, that we're speaking to, so that way they are enticed for more. They want to grab more of whoever or whatever it is that we are. And once we do that, we know that that event planner, those people in that audience are going to want to call us back. They're going to want to be a part of whatever it is that we're doing, and we can build community together. We can all become better. We can all grow together. It's a really good thing.
And throughout almost everything that you've said here, that one word keeps coming up: service. And your whole message is about servant leadership. And so what does that mean?
Oh, wow. Thanks so much for asking that question, Bill. That is at the epicenter of my heart. It's a very, very simple thing. It's thinking about others more than we think about ourselves. Servant leadership is about looking at the other people that we're around, that we're serving, not thinking of ourselves bigger or higher or more than those people, noticing that there are things about other people that will actually increase us if we would invest in them. It's like this commercial that I heard years ago from Franklin Templeton Investments. They make a statement. It's really simple. They say, gain from our perspective. That's their slogan, gain from our perspective. So they're an investment company. They have money. So, right, if I have my own money, who knows better what to do with my money than me, right? Well, actually, what Franklin Templeton Investments is saying is they know how to handle your money better. But if you would allow them to serve you, they can actually grow you in ways that you can't grow yourself. That's, in my estimation, a microcosm of servant leadership. Let me take whatever it is I have and give it to you fully so that you can grow. And then by proxy, we grow. That is what servant leadership is to me.
You know, it's one of those things where at the most basic level, one of the ways I've looked at working in a corporate environment is that if I want to get promoted, the best way for me to get promoted at work is to get my boss promoted ahead of me.
That's good, man.
So you also have a podcast on this theme, and what drove you to launch your podcast?
I tell you what, I was going out, I was looking for more information. I was really raw when it came to the idea of servant leadership. It was a buzzword in my estimation. So I wanted to find out what was really the real raw things about servant leadership. And so I was reading a lot, and I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not huge as far as reading is concerned, just because I'm not good at it. I mean, you say how you're not good at it. I fall asleep on books. I just do. And so audiobooks, that's my thing. That's my moneymaker. I will get an audiobook and I will listen to that thing until the cows call home. And so what I was looking for was a podcast that would talk to me on a consistent basis about what a servant leader looks like, how a certain leader behaves, what are the things that servant leaders do? Well, I really wasn't finding anything. Everything was super old. There wasn't anything really fresh. There wasn't anything that was up to date or relevant. And so somebody told me a long time ago that limitations breed creativity. It's a mentor of mine. Her name is Heather Zempel. And the limitation was there isn't a lot of consistent content right now out on servant leadership via podcast. So I just started one. I bought a microphone and it was terrible. When you go to servicespower.org, you listen to the first episode, it is bad. I mean, I had my wife with me, which is really, really cool. That was a really fantastic part of that whole podcast. But man, it was the worst, Bill. It was the worst. And so we're now kind of building that thing up. We are really passionate about it. And the thing is, I'm a servant leader. I want to make sure that if I'm going to give anybody everything, I'm going to make sure that it's my absolute best. Why? Because my goal is for them to grow. My success is their success. I don't have success outside of their success. And once they grow, once they become better, once they get bigger, and once they get badder, I know I'm able to be bigger, badder, and better as well. And so we invested in it. We got, and so now we're here. We're talking about it. We've had some really, really cool people come on to the podcast and talk about servant leadership. And every single podcast, regardless of where they came from, no matter what walk of life, I grew. I came better, and it's such a cool thing. I didn't have to be the authority because they were, and all of a sudden, here we are.
That's awesome. You know, that's actually sort of similar to the reason why I started my other podcast, The Stroke Cast, was because after I had a stroke about 19 months ago, I started looking for podcasts on the topic, and there really wasn't a whole lot out there at that point. So I went ahead and started my own. But one of the cool things that I've through there is that by starting a project like that and by getting to talk to some amazing people, you learn so much. I mean, and even with this show, we're up to like, I think this is going to be episode 113. I was always very good at public speaking before I started the show, but I never really understood why until you start doing a show, you start teaching something, and you really are forced to break it down and to learn just what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it and what works and what doesn't and why.
No, you're exactly right. And you got to get yourself in a position where you're consistently a learner. And if we're not learning, we're probably dying. And so we want to put ourselves in a position where we're constantly growing, constantly getting better. And these are the type of things that'll do it. One of the things that we don't do as leaders, as professionals, is we don't put ourselves in a position that we are submitted. And that's really what is at the apex of being a servant leader. I mean, to be honest, what you did, Bill, is when you started that podcast about strokes. I mean, even this podcast that you started now about public speaking, what you're doing is you're serving a wide audience of people who have a need. They have something, they're looking for something, and then now they reach out to your podcast, they reach out to your work, and they're gaining and they're growing from it. And so this is the things that we need to do. We need to put ourselves in a position that's junior to others. One of the biggest pieces of advice that I'm giving leaders now is ask questions or put yourselves in situations where you already understand something or know the answer to. And you just kind of alluded to it. You went through a stroke and then you started finding information on a stroke or podcasts on a stroke that wasn't out there. You did something. You put yourself, now you got guests that are coming in talking about it. You're a public speaker. You were already pretty good at it, but then you put yourself out there on the podcast and now you're learning, you're growing, you're getting better. How unfortunate would it be if Bill Monroe had this ego that was just massive and he just went out there and he just spoke about stuff and he just kept talking and he had deficiencies and he had holes in his game and he never learned, he never grew. Now you're in a position where you've learned from 113 guests or however many guests have been on your podcast. I can't remember exactly. I've listened to most of the shows that you got, but whoever those people are, you have pushed yourself in a position to really learn from them. And the only thing it's done, it's made Bill Monroe better.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things too, where if I'm the smartest person in the room, I'm in the wrong room.
I agree wholeheartedly about me, not you, about myself.
The other thing that you mentioned there too, and I think is really important, especially for folks who want to just start speaking or start their own podcast or start anything, is that you mentioned your first episode with that microphone that it sounds terrible. And that's one of those things. A lot of folks who go out and they look at other people who are doing things in the field and think, wow, I don't know that I can do that. I'm afraid to start because I can't do what they're doing. You know, I tell folks, go listen to your favorite podcast that may be at episode 300 or 400. Listen to that and then go back and listen to episodes 1, 2, 3, and 4. You will see a huge difference. You don't get to be as good as you are in number 300, number 400, number 500 unless you first go through the rough times of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
You're exactly right. And when you're speaking, if you're a speaker out there, embrace your first one. Yeah. Embrace that so much, not just because, you know, maybe this is your first paid talk, not because you were able to get the opportunity, but that's the point where you get to learn. That's your ground zero. That is your bottom floor. And everywhere you get to go now is up. You get to be better. I have run into so many people, Bill, who won't go because they're not the best at it. You know, perfectionism, I think that, there's quite a few people that talk about perfectionism. I know that Tony Robbins, one of the things that he says, that perfectionism is the greatest disease, the greatest killer of people. It's a disease. Because if we think we're going to be awesome right off the bat at anything, well, you're selling yourself short, because even if you are amazing, you can be even more amazing. You can grow yourself. You can be at a better level. And so put yourself out there. Go do it. If you have something on the inside, go do it. You're going to get better. People are going to get better. You're going to grow. Everyone else is going to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what advice do you generally have for aspiring speakers?
Honestly, I wish I had more aspiring speakers talking to me. And I think the biggest advice I have about aspiring speakers is stop looking at the money. Do not look at the money. The money is not the big deal. I've talked to a couple of aspiring speakers and they're looking for gigs that'll pay them. Listen, no, you want to be a great speaker. That's what you want to do. So go find a gig anywhere. Now, don't talk about anything. Yeah. Find a niche. Find something you're passionate about. Find something that you're knowledgeable about. I've heard a lot of really great people that just go out there and they speak about anything. Grant Baldwin, I love his podcast. He's one of those stories, but he's just he's not fair. He's phenomenal.
Yeah,
but he's one of those guys that went out there.
Show.
Yeah. Oh, the Speaking Lab is sick. It's so good. And Grant Baldwin is so good. I mean, he's got one of those stories where he went out there and, man, he just started speaking and he's killing it. And I don't know that that's necessarily the best way. You want to find something that you're good at, you're passionate about, because you want to start on a great plane. You want to start at a great place. Start with confidence. We've been talking a lot about confidence and trusting yourself. If you got something that you know cold, go talk about that. Now, you might eventually be a great enough speaker that you can speak eventually on a wide array of topics, but you want to niche yourself. Go find that one thing and go do it for free. Go do it for somebody. Go do it for an audience that really, really needs it, and just get started. Just go. Just do it. And once you do it, you'll learn some things about yourself. The next piece of advice I'd love to get an aspiring speaker is to find somebody with a camera. I don't care what kind of cameras. Well, I do kind of care. Don't get iPhones. I hate iPhones. I'm not an Apple fan. No, I'm joking. Whatever phone you can get, whatever recording device you can get, find somebody that will tape your talk. Even if it's a whole talk, fantastic. If it's 5 minutes, good. And notice things about yourself. And notice things that you're doing that may be annoying to the audience. Watch the audience. Oh my gosh. Watch the audience as well. Watch yourself, then watch the audience and see how they react to you. What are the things that are good? What are the things that aren't so good? And the last thing I would say to an aspiring speaker is find somebody that's more seasoned than you and follow that individual. Hang on their every word, hang on their every footstep. Now, maybe you get to talk to that person one-on-one, face-to-face, or maybe you get to just watch a bunch of their talks. I mean, I watch so many people, Bill. I mean, from the Grant Baldwins to the Tony Robbins to the John Maxwells, to Eric Thomas, all those guys that are just exceptional at their craft, at their field. I'm never going to have an audience with Tony Robbins or Eric Thomas, but I've learned a ton from them by just humbling myself, slowing down, sitting back, and actually studying their craft, studying their skills, studying what they do. How do they interact with people in crowds? What is the reaction that the crowd is giving them, the audience is giving them? How come? What is that thing that allows event planners to continue to call them, continue to get them to come back and speak to them? So those are the things I would say to an aspiring speaker.
That is awesome. And I think one of the things that's really interesting there too is once you start, there are lots of different ways you can watch a talk, but a lot of times we go in and we're part of the audience and we're appreciating the talk for the content or the message that the speaker is sharing. What we really want our audiences to do when we speak. But there's another level that you're talking about when you start getting conscious of it and sort of try and step away from the talk and look at it at the meta level. What is happening? What is the speaker doing? Why is the audience reacting that way? What worked? What didn't? And sometimes, that is going to take a different way of looking at a talk. And sometimes maybe that means if you're watching a talk, you watch it for the first time as an audience member and then go watch a second time and look at, what's happening and the structure of it and why that's happening. And you can do that with the Tony Robbins, with any of these big speakers, or you could do this at your own organization when your company has its national sales meeting or your CEO is speaking and they have all their directors and the VPs get up there and speak. The folks in the audience know who's a good speaker and who's not. They may not know why. They may not even know what that means. But look at the ones in your organization, at what they do well, at the people who respond to them, because that tells you not only what you can do to be more effective as a speaker in general, but it also helps you then align with the specific culture of your organization and what is happening within your own company walls, because each company, each organization has its own dialect, its own language, its own accent, its own culture. And if you want to stay within your organization and grow, watch the folks that people say do an awesome job and figure out why they do it.
Imitation is the best form of flattery. I'll tell you, it works.
Exactly. Why reinvent the wheel when somebody else has already done it well?
Exactly.
So who's been the most surprising guest on your podcast?
Oh, wow. Episode 13 of the podcast, I had a DJ and a rapper on my podcast. We called it Service from the Stage, and it was a really great podcast. One, because when you're thinking about servant leadership, you're probably not thinking about the person that's getting you all hyped up and yelling and screaming and doing all those things. And so having those guys and their energy on my podcast, typically, I don't know if you can tell, Bill, but I'm a pretty excitable guy.
Yeah, you got a little bit of energy
I'm a pretty
there.
high. I don't know, just a little bit, right? So to have people in a room with me that can match that on a consistent basis for 30 some odd minutes straight. I mean, it was an incredible podcast. But then there were some things that I sat back and I was listening to, and I was scratching my head like, wow, I did not think about that in that context. Now, just to let the cat out of the bag, if anybody goes to listen to that podcast, they're going to be talking a lot about their religion and their beliefs and their faith. But what I took away from it were some of those core principles about just liking people and doing things selflessly that I could see from an entertainment perspective, a place where most people, you would assume, when the lights are on bright, it's all about you. Everybody's looking at you. All eyes are on you. And so your response to that would be like, yeah, it's about me. And these guys were talking about how it wasn't. And it was just a compelling talk. It was a compelling podcast. They were without question the most surprising guests because I had a high expectation of them. But man, I didn't think they were going to give me what they gave me. It was phenomenal.
Awesome. That is fantastic. And we'll definitely link to that episode over in the show notes over at 2minutetalktips.com/servant leadership. Well, Lyle, this has been absolutely fantastic. If folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
Well, that's a great question as well. Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about that, Bill. You can find me on LinkedIn. So just search Lyle Hart and I'm right there. You can go to serviceispower.org/about us, or you can go to the entire webpage. You can find me there as well. Twitter. I'm on Twitter. I am the serving leader, and it's that last E in leader. You drop it off, you put the R on, or you search Lyle Hart there and I'll pop up there on Twitter as well. And sure, you can email me at lyle@impactservantleadership.com or hello@servicespower.com. That'll eventually find its way to me as well. I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us this week. This has been awesome.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate you having me. It was an absolute honor to serve your audience and to be able to learn some things from you as well.
You know, it's always great to talk with another trainer, podcaster, and, fan of Grant Baldwin's The Speaker Lab podcast. I found Lyle's description of training in the military particularly interesting. It's a model based on simulating the experience as much as practical, since in the real world, lives, millions of dollars in equipment, and U.S. foreign policy are all on the line and dependent on that training kicking in when it's needed. Obviously, most corporate trainers do not face the same stakes, but our work may take us closer than we think. The way our learners do their jobs can impact millions of dollars in business, the jobs of their coworkers, and the health and safety of colleagues and customers. E-learning and stand-up lectures can absolutely be part of the training solution, but ultimately, we need to get our learners as close to the actual real work as we possibly can. I also really like how Lyle started his podcast on servant leadership. He went looking for content for himself, found that it didn't exist, so he created it. If there's a resource that you are looking for and that you can't find, go ahead and create it. You'll help others and you'll likely learn a lot in the process as well. You can find all the links we talked about today in the show notes in your podcast app or over at 2minutetalktips.com/servant leadership. Is there something you want to learn more about that you're passionate about? Try creating content about it for other people. Subscribe to the Services Power Podcast and 2-Minute Talk Tips in your favorite podcast app for free so you never miss an episode. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
2-Minute Talk Tips is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.